Hello and welcome back to Rock Records Reviewed. My name's Adam, and this week, in memory of Ginger Baker, I'm going to look at the 4 studio albums released by the legendary 60s supergroup Cream. Ginger Baker died just yesterday, and I always feel a little bit of a pang of emotion when some of these classic old rockers die. I think they represent our youth, and for me, I was completely, and still am completely, obsessed with rock music and the whole sort of culture of that era and the history of rock music, and so it marks the passing of time, and it's a bittersweet thing to sort of listen to the records knowing that all these people are dying out now. Ginger Baker was not, as I'm sure you know, regarded as the nicest man or the sweetest man on the planet. And there's a fantastic documentary called Beware of Mr. Baker, which you must check out if you have an interest in the band or in him. But he was an absolutely brilliant drummer. That's undeniable. He was an innovative drummer. He was sort of schooled in jazz, but his horizons were much wider than that. And he was one third of Cream, who are one of the most pivotal, influential rock groups of all time, and especially considering they were only around for about 18 months to 2 years, their influence has been profound and indelible. Cream formed in London in 1966, just on the cusp of psychedelia. It was, of course, Ginger Baker from the Graham Bond organisation on drums, Jack Bruce, who'd also played in the Graham Bond organisation. He's a sort of dour Scotsman, Jack Bruce, and the relationship between the fiery Ginger Baker and Jack Bruce was always quite difficult. So Jack Bruce on vocals and bass, and of course Eric Clapton on guitar. Clapton had played in the Yardbirds, and he'd also been in John Mayall's Blues Breakers. The Cream called themselves Cream because they kind of very immodestly regarded themselves as the cream of the players on the scene at the time, and they took in some heavy rock, some jazz rock, some blues, heavy blues, psychedelia, whatever you want to call it. Their albums sort of have a real sort of a mixture of styles, but somehow managed to really gel together sonically, and that's a tribute, I think, not only to the musicians, but particularly to their producer, Felix Paparaldi. We'll talk a little bit more about him and what he did for the band as we go along. But look, there's only 4 albums to look at, so let's get into it. The 4th best Cream album, I think, is quite unanimously agreed to be Goodbye Cream from 1969. The band had already announced they were going to split up when they decided to record this album, and in fact it came out after they had split up. They were persuaded to go back because they were so successful. They were persuaded to go back into the studio and make another record. But by this point, the relentless touring, particularly across America, and the antagonism between particularly Ginger Baker and Jack Bruce was really dragging the band down, particularly Eric Clapton, who felt he wasn't being listened to enough. Also, interesting enough, Jack Bruce by this time was using Marshall amplifiers, which were new and improved amps on the ones he was using, and he was whacking the volume up very loud. You can hear quite how loud the band were when you watch their Albert Hall concert video. It's pretty ear-splitting stuff. This album it's only actually got 3 new songs on it because half the album is live. So it's a kind of a bit of a cheat in a way. It's very short, it's very perfunctory. The best new song on here by a mile is Badge, which you may know Eric Clapton wrote with George Harrison, who also appears on the song famously as Angelo Mysterioso. It's got really pretty good live versions of I'm So Glad and Politician on here. But it's a bit of a hodgepodge of studio and live stuff. Very successful. I mean, Cream were huge when they were about. This was number 1 in the UK. It was number 2 in the USA. It's the great thing about the production on Cream's records, and it's still here on their new songs, is what Felix Paparaldi brought to them. There's space in this music, but there's also real depth and power, and that's quite a neat trick. And I think it'd be very difficult now for a band to emulate the Cream sound, the production sound, because there's something very of its time and raw, but at the same time, there's a lot of depth to it. The third best the third best Cream album is, I think, Wheels of Fire, which was their third album from 1968. This is a double album, and if you're under any illusions as to how big Cream were, this was the world's first selling double platinum album. By that I mean the world's first double album that became a platinum seller. So one side is studio and one side is live recording. They did this because Cream did these sort of very neat, short kind of singles and short blues songs on their albums, but they really felt that they were best seen live, where they could extemporize and improvise and go on for hours and hours, and often they did. Really, the interplay between the musicians was very, very exciting, and you can see it in a lot of live footage that they released at the time. The best songs on here, you've got White Room, which is a rock classic. Born Under a Bad Sign, Politician, Deserted Cities of the Heart, the really charming Pressed Rat and Warthog, which is a lovely song. On the side two, you've got 16-minute versions of Toad. You've got Ginger Baker's 16-minute drum solo in Toad. So look, whether you're a fan of drum solos or not, is that they can be quite exciting, but live particularly. I was lucky enough to see Cream many years ago at their reunion show, and Ginger Baker did do a long version of Toad, and live a drum solo is really, really exciting. It can be you're really stimulating. I think on record sometimes they can drag on a little bit, so I think 16 minutes of a drum solo on Wheels of Fire is a little bit much, even for me. But the mother lode on this record really though is on the live side, and it's the absolutely incendiary version of Crossroads, Robert Johnson blues standard. But this is one of the really great go-to guitar records. Eric Clapton absolutely plays his socks off on this record. It's actually two versions, from one night, and the last minute or so is taken from the second night, and they're chopped together. But that doesn't make the recording any less impressive. The guitar solo is absolutely extraordinary. This was 205 on Rolling Stone's all-time top 500 albums. And I think there's some very, very exciting stuff on here. Cream are always a little bit of a curate's egg, because they do throw in bits of psychedelia and some long solos, especially on the live stuff. So sort of proceed with caution, but know that there are some gems all over their records if you're prepared to look for them. I think the second best Cream album is their first album from 1966, Fresh Cream. Now, this is awkward because the US and UK versions are slightly different in quite important ways. For example, the US version doesn't have the UK version, doesn't have "I Feel Free" on it, which was absolutely one of my favourite Cream songs. So in the UK, it was just released as a standalone single. The US version doesn't have "Spoonful," which is one of their heaviest and most impressive blues covers. What you get on both versions, you get "I'm So Glad," which is a Skip James standard, NSU, Sleepy Time. This is heavy blues. This is blues like people hadn't heard before. There's a real bottom end here. There's a depth in the sound that I've mentioned before. There's a hint of impending psychedelia on these records as well. There's a desire to sort of not just play the blues, but sort of break free from its shackles a little bit and throw in, these little sort of moments of oddness and peculiarity. Most of the writing on the album is done by Jack Bruce, but the sound, which did give way to heavy rock and heavy metal, and as well as a few other things. This is pre-Hendrix. It's before Hendrix's first album came out in the UK, I think. So the influence here is incalculable, and with Hendrix's entrance onto the stage. I think it's with Cream and Hendrix together that really, really set the wheels, the sort of thundering, grinding wheels in motion for what became heavy rock and Black Sabbath and Purple and all those sort of bands. But the best Cream album, I think, is their second album from 1967, Disraeli Gears, which was recorded in 3.5 days, which is really, really impressive because there's quite a lot of songs on this record. So, Cream formed in London, and they were right, and Eric Clapton particularly, right in the epicenter of swinging 60s London and the scene and the fashion, everything that was going on. And you look at the album cover and you can see that they absolutely nailed the vibe, the zeitgeist, if you like, of what was happening at the time. Cashbox in the States regarded this as the number one album of the year. It was a huge hit on both sides of the Atlantic. Not least because it had Sunshine of Your Love in it, which is a rock standard, I'm sure you know, and can probably even play on the guitar, even if you don't play the guitar. Strange Brew, which is one of their most impressive blues covers as well. Tales of Brave Ulysses, which has that real lovely wah-wah psychedelia about it. A lot of the lyrics, Cream lyrics, were written by the poet Pete Brown, and that's one of his more out there ones. Swalabra, Outside Woman Blues, Dance the Night Away. The sort of quite haunting We're Going Wrong. I mean, this is their best album. This is full of great songs. VH1, the music channel, named this the 87th best album of all time. And I think this is absolutely one of the key albums of the 60s for all the reasons I mentioned earlier. I mean, I think its influence is still heard every night today all over the world at blues festivals and heavy rock festivals and rock festivals. Being a guitarist and a musician myself, I know that I reference so many of Clapton's licks and so much of his feel, but a lot of the time. Speaking about Clapton, I think it's what he on the Cream records, his solos were perfect. They were really, really. They don't sound crafted, and I'd like to know how much of it was improvised. But you listen to a solo on something like "Sunshine of Your Love" or the solo on White Room. They just have a really lovely feel to them, and there's a slightly odd and quirky, woozy feel to them, but they sound really, really good. And then live, he sort of took them and just sort of went off on one with them. I mean, he really was an extraordinary player, and I don't like to hear people malign him as much as they do these days, just because they think they're better than him or faster than him or whatever they think they are. So, Disraeli Gears for me, absolutely the best Cream album. There's good stuff on all of these records. I would suggest maybe Goodbye Cream is not an essential record to have. But if you really want to get the perfect sort of taste of Cream, then there are a number of really good compilations out there, all of which have all the main songs on there, from Crossroads to Sunshine of Your Love and White Room and I Feel Free as well. So there you go, in memory of the irascible but brilliant Ginger Baker. That was my order of the 4 Cream studio albums. I hope you enjoyed it. You may not agree with me. If you don't, then why not say so in the comments below, and we can get a discussion going about it. But I will see you again very soon for another Rock Records Reviewed. Until then, thank you very much for watching and listening. Bye.